T was an ordinary day at Jefferson High School when the lockdown was called. No one could have predicted the terror that would unfold. In the moment of fear and confusion, the halls, once bustling with the sounds of students and teachers, became eerily silent. The windows were shut tight, and the doors were locked, but something far darker than a mere threat was creeping through the corridors. This isn't just any lockdown. This is a story of strange happenings, things that shouldn't be possible, yet were happening in plain sight. From shadowy figures lurking in the hallways to strange whispers echoing through empty classrooms, these 5 terrifying true stories from haunted school lockdowns will chill you to the bone. Stay with me as we step into the eerie world of Jefferson High, where the walls whisper, the halls breathe, and some things never leave. It started with a low murmur, almost a collective sigh, as the announcement came through the speakers. A lockdown. A precautionary measure. The principal's voice echoed through the empty hallways, warning everyone to stay inside their classrooms and away from the windows. Everyone complied, thinking little of it at first. The students, knowing it was just a drill or maybe a false alarm, returned to their work. But one student, Emma, noticed something strange. As she glanced out the door's tiny window, she saw something move, just outside in the hallway. A shadow. Not a person, but something else entirely. The shape of a figure, but no discernible details. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She squinted harder, but the figure seemed to move just out of sight. She stood up, unsure of whether to leave her seat and investigate or stay hidden. Emma, her friend Lisa whispered, her voice shaking. What's wrong? Emma's gaze never left the hallway. The shadow had moved again, closer this time. She felt a chill crawl down her spine as the figure stopped right in front of the door. At that moment, the classroom lights flickered. Maybe it's a janitor, Emma said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. But then, the door handle began to turn. Slowly, almost deliberately. Emma backed away, her eyes glued to the door. She could hear the faint scratching sound of the metal scraping against the wood. Another flicker. A thud from the other side. Suddenly, the lights went out completely. The classroom plunged into darkness. Lisa screamed. A chill raced through Emma's body, and her instinct screamed at her to run. But where? The shadow was right outside. They were trapped. After what felt like an eternity, the lights flickered back on, and the door flew open. But there was nothing on the other side, nothing except the soft echoes of the hallway. The shadow had vanished. For the rest of the lockdown, the students huddled together in fear. And Emma never spoke of the figure in the hallway again. But every time she walked past that classroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching from within. It was the middle of the school year when the next lockdown was called at Jefferson High. This time, the reason was unclear. The police were outside, sirens blaring, but the threat was never made public. Sarah, a senior at the school, was in her 3rd period class when the announcement came over the intercom. She sat in the back of the room, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. The usual feeling of unease that accompanied lockdowns was heavier this time. The teacher, Mr. Harris, kept glancing nervously toward the door, as if expecting someone, or something, to burst in. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting. That was when she heard it. Soft whispers. At first, she thought it was just the sound of the wind outside, but the more she listened, the more distinct they became. It was as if someone was speaking, just above a whisper, from within the walls. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the source. Her classmates were either unaware or too afraid to acknowledge it. But Sarah couldn't ignore it. The whispers weren't coming from the air vent. They were coming from deeper inside the walls, as though something, or someone, was trapped inside. Then came the laughter. It was cold. Hollow. The type of laugh that sent an icy chill down her spine. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. The laughter stopped as quickly as it began, but the whispers continued, growing louder, more frantic. Her breathing quickened as she glanced nervously around the room, trying to see if anyone else had heard it. The teacher suddenly stood up, walking toward the door with trembling hands. He tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. It was as though something on the other side was holding it shut. In the silence, the whispers grew to a crescendo. The walls seemed to hum with malevolent energy, and Sarah could feel the hairs on the back of her neck rise. She was no longer alone in the room. Something was watching. With one last effort, Mr. Harris yanked open the door. But there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. The whispers faded, leaving behind an oppressive silence. No one spoke of it. Not in front of the teachers, anyway. But Sarah knew. She had heard the whispers, and they weren't coming from this world. David had never been a fan of the school's old wing. It was cold, dark, and had an unsettling energy about it. Rumor had it that the section of the school was built on land where an old mansion once stood, a mansion that had burned down under mysterious circumstances many years ago. During one particular lockdown, David found himself in that very wing, his heart racing as he paced nervously down the dark corridor, his eyes darting at every creak and groan of the building. The lockdown had come unexpectedly, and David had been caught in the hall with no way to get back to his classroom. He made his way down the dimly lit hallway, his footsteps echoing off the tiles. The building seemed unnaturally cold, the air thick and oppressive. He stopped in front of an old classroom door. The windows were fogged up, but through the glass, David could make out what appeared to be shadows moving inside. He hesitated. The room was supposed to be empty. Slowly, he opened the door. Inside, he saw nothing at first, just rows of desks, the chalkboard blank and untouched. But as he stepped further in, he felt something brush against his leg. He looked down to see nothing but empty space. The room was not as empty as it seemed. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, and the lights flickered. David spun around, his pulse racing. Then, the voice. A soft, but unmistakable whisper in his ear. "Get out." David froze. The voice wasn't a student. It wasn't a teacher. It was the voice of something far older, and far more malevolent. He could feel the air growing heavier, suffocating him. He turned toward the door, but it was locked from the outside. Panic set in. He banged on the door, yelling for help, but the building seemed to have swallowed his voice. The shadows in the room grew darker, swirling around him. He saw figures standing just beyond his reach, staring at him with hollow, empty eyes. David ran for the window, hoping to break it, but as he did, the shadows reached for him. Cold fingers brushed against his skin, pulling him back toward the center of the room. He couldn't escape. And someone, was watching him from the darkness. As the lockdown came to an end, the students slowly began to emerge from their classrooms, shaken but unaware of the horrors that had transpired during those dark moments. The whispers faded, the shadows receded, and the halls once again echoed with the sounds of everyday life. But for those who had witnessed the strange events, things would never be the same. Emma, Sarah, and David would never forget what they saw, what they felt, in those dark, haunting moments. And as time went on, they realized that Jefferson High School wasn't just a building. It was something more, something that held on to the past in ways they couldn't understand. The lockdowns had ended. But the fear, the whispers, and the shadows would linger, hiding just beyond the corners of their minds. And so, the question remains, what truly haunts Jefferson High? Is it just the history of the building, or is there something darker at play, waiting for the next lockdown to bring it back to life? Only those brave enough to step into the shadows will ever know.